Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, what changes have occurred since the last time we met. Christine Alicio is busy doing all she can to help her community of La Mesa heal. So you have me today as vice chair. And I hope everybody, prepared for the meeting, took a look at the minutes, took a look at the agenda and has that handy. And then, we all have our unique forms of communication ready. I have extra if anybody needs them, let me know. Anyhow, welcome everybody to the Sandag June 9th EMP Working Group meeting. Before we jump into the meeting, I want to ask the clerk to confirm that we have a quorum. Tessa, are you there? Do we have a quorum?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you have a quorum for this meeting.
Great. I can't see any of you. I can just see hands raised when that happens. So I'm glad to have you all here today. Because this is a new process for all of us, I'm going to ask the clerk to go over some basic instructions for us all, for both the working group members and members of the public to participate in the meeting. Tessa?
Thank you, Chair. First, for the working group members, your microphone is muted by default. You are in attendees listen-only mode. This is very important. Do not touch your microphone icon. If you self-mute, we are not able to unmute you. If you have a question or a comment or would like to make a second or motion, just click on the raise hand icon at the top right of the screen. The chair will be able to see a list of all the working group members who have their hands raised and will call on you at the appropriate time. You will be unmuted. Your microphone will turn from red to green. And then after your speak, we will mute you again. The chair will proceed to the next working group member in line. The chair will call on staff to present each item, and after each presentation, we'll follow the normal process. If you have a question or a comment, raise your hand, and the chair will call on you. We'll then take public comment at that time, which will be described in a moment. Although there is a comment box into which you can type, we will not be using that function. For voting, by state law, all votes in a teleconference meeting must be made by roll call vote. After there has been a motion and a second, the clerk will call for the vote for each jurisdiction individually, and you will be unmuted to vote. If you hear that your vote was entered incorrectly, please raise your hand at that time and the chair will call on you to correct your vote. Also, for clarity of the record, please identify yourself each time you speak. For public comments from members of the public, we have sent comments that were emailed to the clerk of the board in advance of the meeting by 4 p.m. yesterday to all the working group members. The public can also email comments during today's meeting. Those should be sent to clerk@sandag.org and identify the number to which your comments pertain and the name of the commenter. The clerk will then read all these comments that were submitted during the meeting into the record. The chair has set a limit of 1 minute per comment, but the entirety of the comment will be made part of the meeting record. Back to you, Vice Chair Carmichael.
Thank you. So as a reminder, please raise your little icon hand to make comments or motions. And please do not mute yourself. Staff will unmute and mute when your name is called. Okay? With that, let's get started with item number 1, welcome and introductions. Usually we go around the room and introduce ourselves, but because of the format of today's meeting, we're going to skip that. Instead, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today. So moving on to item number 2, item number 1 was easy. Approval of meeting minutes. Okay, so hopefully you all have those. And may I have a motion by a raise of hand? Ooh, I see Jim Whalen. Thank you, Jim. So that's a motion to, well, is that a motion or could that be a comment?
He needs to say for the record.
Okay. So are we going to unmute Jim?
Mr. Whalen, you are self-muted.
I am never self-muted. So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Do I have a second? Susan Wynn. Thank you, Susan. Do we have any public comments? I see no hands raised. If none, so I'll ask the clerk to begin the roll call and vote, please. So I'm voting aye.
Thank you, Chair. I did not hear Susan state for the record that she was providing a second. If you would state that for the record, please, that she did make the second.
Susan did raise her hand when asked for a second.
Yes, I second.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, I will do the roll call. Thank you. The City of La Mesa, Chair Alicio is absent. County of San Diego, Vice Chair Carmichael.
Aye.
City of San Diego, Kristen Forberger. And Kristen, you do not have audio. If you could please note your vote in the chat box, then we will we'll read that into the record for you. City of Santee, Melanie Cush. Go ahead, Melanie.
Yes, I approve.
City of Carlsbad, Roseanne Humphrey.
Aye.
City of Poway, Scott Nespor.
Aye.
City of Chula Vista, Cheryl Goddard. Chula Vista is absent. City of Oceanside, Jeff Hunt. Oceanside is absent. Army Corps of Engineers, Kyle Dahl. Kyle is absent. Caltrans, Bruce April.
Approve.
Department of Fish and Wildlife, David Mayer. Oh, I believe his alternate is here, Hans Sins.
Muted.
I abstained from the vote. I was not at that meeting, so.
Thank you. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Susan Wynn.
I approve.
U.S. Forest Service, Kirsten Winter. I'm also trying to look. There she is. There you go, Kirsten.
Yeah, I will abstain. I was not at that meeting either.
U.S. Geological Survey, Robert Fisher.
Yeah, I approve.
Wildlife Conservation Board, Rebecca Friss.
I'll approve.
Endangered Habitats League, Michael Beck. And I apologize, I'm trying to also look to see if they may have logged in below without their number identifier, but I do not see Michael Beck's absent. San Diego Conservation Network, Ann Harvey is absent. The Nature Conservancy, Trish Smith.
This is Trish Smith, and I approve the minutes.
Thank you, Trish.
Ann Harvey is here today. I see her hand
I
raised.
apologize, Ann. Yes, if you could register your vote, Ann.
I was not at that meeting,
So
abstain.
thank you. The San Diego Foundation, Candace Woe. I believe Candace was in, but did not have audio. And I don't see her in any longer, so we'll mark as absent. Alliance for Habitat Conservation, Jim Whalen.
I'm good.
Is that a yes?
Yes, I made the motion second.
Yes, sir. Just got to state it for the record. Building Industry Association, Matt Adams. I believe there's Matt.
I approve, yes.
Thank you. That, I want to check, make sure nobody sent anything in the chat. No.
Tessa,
Yes,
I have a chat with Kristen Forberger. City of San Diego is yes.
thank you. That's what I was looking for. I didn't see it. Thank you. 2, 3, 4. Motion passes with those members present with 3 abstentions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was painful. Okay, now we can move on to number 3, thankfully not a voting item. Public and member comments. Tessa, are there any public comments to be read into the record?
I do not have public comments.
And then moving on to member comments, if any of the working group would like to raise their hands, now is the time for comments. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Hopefully I have everybody up there. I do. Okay, so at this time, I have one thing to add in there, that the Transnet Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, the ITOC, is looking to fill one vacancy on its 7-member committee. A professional with experience in real estate, land economics, and/or right-of-way acquisition. The ITOC aids in the implementation of the Transnet program by providing an increased level of accountability for expenditures and developing recommendations for improvements to the performance of the program. ITOC membership is open to qualified individuals from throughout the region with the appropriate skill and experience. Candidates are required to complete a Form 700, probably yearly, to ensure that there are no conflicts of interest. However, individuals employed with organizations doing business with SANDAG are not precluded from submitting an application for consideration. So applications are due to SANDAG by July 1st of this year. So if anyone's interested in being on the ITOC, please submit your application. So if there are no further comments, and I don't see any hands up, we will move on to item number 4. Kim Smith will be requesting the formation of an ad hoc committee. Please go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to have to go through this voting again, but bear with us. It's that time of year again. So the EMP working group is requesting, or staff is requesting that the EMP working group approve the formation of an ad hoc committee for the development of our fiscal year 21-22 work plan for regional management and monitoring. And this also includes the annual allocation of funding for fiscal year 21. So this committee will likely meet sometime in July, date and time to be determined. I need a total of about 6 to 8 folks, and then I'll pass it back to Leanne to ask for volunteers. Leanne?
Great. So first I would like to volunteer. Oops, I almost did it incorrectly. I'd like to volunteer as vice chair. And also we have heard from David Mayer, even though he's not joining us today, that he would also like to serve on the ad hoc committee. So let's put his name down. So please indicate by raising your hand if you are interested. So I see.
I'm interested.
Okay. So I've got, let's see.
How do I raise my hand?
Was that Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, I'm interested, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
You do not have you cannot raise your hand. You just need to unmute and speak into the record and maybe show your camera so that the vice chair knows that you want to speak.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah, I didn't see the hand thing. Yes, I would like to volunteer as well.
Okay, so I think everybody's had a moment here. We have, okay, so may I have a motion to approve the following? Robert Fisher, Matt Adams, Kristen Winter, Trish Smith, Susan Wynn, and Isabel, did you have a question?
Hi. Yes, I wanted to volunteer for the committee, ad hoc committee.
Okay. So I don't have it listed. Are you an actual member or an alternate?
She asked about the ITALK committee, not the budget one.
Oh, okay. So that was so Isabel, if you're interested in the ITALK committee, that you have to go through the SANDAG website and put in an application for that.
For the ad hoc committee?
Oh, for the ad hoc,
Well,
you
I'm
need to be a member.
Okay, sorry, I don't really see everything properly on the screen. Okay, thanks.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. So let's see. Can I have a motion for, let's see, we have David Mayer, myself, Leanne Carmichael, Matt Adams, Kristen Winter, Jim Whalen, Susan Wynn, Trish Smith to form the ad hoc committee. So now I need a motion. So take
Chair,
off your hands. Yes.
can we just have each of them confirm that is why they raised their hands, perhaps for the record?
Oh, yes.
We could just
Okay,
ask each of
let's
them
start
to raise your hands again, and then we will call on you and unmute you.
So you want them to raise their hands again?
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and take the ones whose hands are raised now so they can confirm.
Okay. So Matt Adams.
Oh, I'm sorry. I unmuted Susan Wynn.
Hi, this is
Okay.
Susan. I would be happy to be on this committee. And can I make a motion too, and can I vote affirmatively so I can do all three things?
We will definitely take your motion, but I'm going to have to call you on the roll call vote for your vote.
All right.
Okay, next. Who are you unmuting next?
Let's go with Trish Smith.
Yes, I want to be on the ad hoc committee. Thank you.
Okay. Matt? Let's unmute Matt Adams. Hey, Matt.
Hi there. Yes, I would like to be on the committee. And if no one seconded the motion, I'll second the motion.
Got it.
Did we have Kirsten Winter?
Yes, this is Kirsten. I volunteered to be on the ad hoc committee.
Okay, do I have 6 members? Do you have all the names down?
There's myself too, Robert Fisher, but I can't raise my hand because I'm a presenter.
Oh, that's right. Robert Fisher.
Leanne, also Jim Whalen. We haven't
Okay.
heard.
Jim?
Hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so
You had
I have a
David-
motion and a sec.
Remember David Meyer?
Yeah, I've
asked
got
her.
it. Okay, so I have a motion by Susan Wynn. I have a second from Matt Adams to create an ad hoc committee for the 2021-22 work plan and fiscal year 2021 annual funding. The committee members will include myself, Leanne Carmichael, Trish Smith, David Mayer, Susan Wynn, Matt Adams, Kirsten Winter, Robert Fisher, and Jim Whalen. So let's do the, well, first I need to ask if we had any public comments on this item.
Thank you, Vice Chair. You do not have public comments on item 4, and there were no public comments on the minutes either.
Okay, thank you. So we need roll call for this motion and second.
Thank you. This will go much more smoothly than the first time. City of La Mesa, Chair Alicio is absent. County of San Diego, Vice Chair Carmichael.
Aye.
City of San Diego, Kirsten Forberger, if you could also just please note your vote in the chat as you did prior. City of Santee, Melanie Cush.
Aye.
City of Carlsbad, Roseanne Humphrey.
I approve.
City of Poway, Scott Nespor. There you are.
Aye.
City of Chula Vista, Cheryl Goddard is absent. City of Oceanside is absent. Army Corps of Engineers is absent. Caltrans, Bruce April. Bruce? Bruce, can you hear us?
Hello?
And your vote on?
Yes, I approve.
Thank you. Department of Fish and Wildlife, Hans Sins.
I approve.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Susan Wynn.
Hi, this is Susan. I approve. And also, Michael Beck is trying to access. Can you see that he's on now?
Yes, thank you. U.S. Forest Service, Kirsten Winter. Let me get to you. I'm sorry. There you go, ma'am.
I approve.
U.S. Geological Survey, Robert Fisher.
I approve.
Wildlife Conservation Board, Rebecca Friss.
I approve.
Endangered Habitats League, Michael Beck. You are self-muted, Michael. Please unmute yourself. Just click once. You are still self-muted, Michael. You need to click your icon one time. Okay, we will come back to Mr. Beck. San Diego Conservation Network, Ann Harvey.
Yes.
The Nature Conservancy, Trish Smith.
This is Trish Smith. I approve.
San Diego Foundation, Candace Woe. Candace?
Yes, hello, I approve.
And may I also ask, were you present during the minutes vote as well?
I wasn't. I was having some internet issues, but no,
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because I didn't want to miss your vote if you were. I'll mark it as absent for that item. Thank you. Mr. Beck,
And
you are
Michael,
unmuted.
it looks like you're good with it.
Yes, if I'm unmuted.
You are?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Good.
Thank you. Alliance for Habitat Conservation, Jim Whalen.
Yes.
And Building Industry Association, Matt Adams.
Yes.
Thank you. That item passes with all members present.
Great. Okay, so we're on to item number 5. Kim Smith will be giving a brief presentation on the development of the regional habitat conservation vision.
Thank you, Leanne. Thanks. That was painful, but we did it. Thank you, guys. So my presentation today is going to focus on the development of the regional habitat conservation vision for San Diego County. Next slide, please. So if you can remember way back in July of last year, SANDAG staff came and gave a presentation on the vision of San Diego Forward, the 2021 regional plan. During this presentation, you heard about the 5 big moves, which is shown above, and these are the key strategies that are being used to identify transportation solutions for critical connections throughout the region. So this includes the Next OS, complete corridors, Transit Leap, flexible fleets, and mobility hub. So habitat conservation is an important component that will be covered in the 2021 regional plan. Specifically, it will be included in the Sustainable Communities Strategy, or CSC. The CSC will guide efforts to meet or exceed the greenhouse gas targets while maintaining quality of life in the San Diego region, which includes the preservation of native habitats. Then at our September EMP working group meeting, we discussed developing this future vision of habitat conservation in our region. And at this meeting, it was specifically requested that we convene a smaller group to help develop this vision for its inclusion in the regional plan and a possible future ballot measure, and then come back to the working group to report out. Next slide, please. So in October of last year and January of 2020, a small group met that consisted of the wildlife agencies, the county, cities of Chula Vista and Carlsbad, SDMMP, USGS, EHL, the Wildlife Coalition, and End Extinction San Diego to develop this vision. And this is the outline shown on the slide that we kind of worked our way through in order to come up with this vision. We needed to determine what our challenges are, what are our goals, what are some of the barriers and the opportunities, and then what are those gaps. So next slide, please. So first, what is our problem? What is our challenge? And we wanted to make it simple, big, and bold. Hold on a second. So San Diego is a biodiversity hotspot and contains plants and animals found nowhere else in the world. Loss and degradation of habitat, invasive species, and changes in the climate are driving many species to the edge of extinction at an increasing rate. So next slide. Then our vision. So what are we going to do about this? Protect, connect, and respect species and their natural habitats to prevent extinction in San Diego County. Next slide. So how do we expect to get there? What are our goals? And we really liked the way protect, connect, and respect kind of went together. So protect would be protecting those existing habitats that are already conserved, maintaining, restoring, and monitoring them, and then acquiring high priority land. And then connect would be continue to connect our linkages, our wildlife corridors, and then connecting people with local species and nature. And then finally, respect through education, youth outreach, recreation and human use, and human health and well-being. So next slide. So in order to move forward with the vision, we needed to identify what are the barriers or what have been the barriers to success. So most of these barriers that we identified exhibited a high impact, it's shown on the x-axis here, but also a high lack of control. So that's what's in the pink box. And those that we identified are lack of regional funding, lack of a local champion or political support, and that was a pretty big one, lack of institutional knowledge, public awareness and support or lack thereof, and human use and recreation impacts. And those identified in the blue box below are barriers that can have a high impact, but are things that we think we have a high degree control over, such as monitoring and collaboration. I mean, that I feel like we're doing a good job at, and developing our preserve metrics. Next slide, please. So next we moved forward to identify what are the opportunities that are available. And again, most of the opportunities that we identified have high impact, but also a high lack of control, and those are in the pink box. Partnerships and collective impact, a common message, funding opportunity, the 5 Big Moves regional plan, and then documenting GHG carbon sequestration in chaparral and CSS. And then those in the blue box below also have a high impact, but might be easier to obtain, like rebranding SDMMP or the formation of a green print. Next slide, please. So now for gaps, specifically our funding gap, which is the big one. So from 2007 to 2009, the EMP working group identified the following funding gaps and put dollars to those gaps, ultimately giving us a total 40-year cost for activities such as land acquisition, habitat management and monitoring, endowments. And now we're looking to update this table. The next step would be moving forward with actually updating it to 2020 cost and getting a more accurate dollar amount for the next 40 years. So next slide, please. And this slide we put up, this is kind of our framework for funding. It shows how everything's cyclical, connected together. We have been, a lot of us have been collaborating with the End Extinction San Diego effort, and they came to our EMP working group, I think it was May of last year, and talked about their efforts. So we have been collaborating with them, sharing this information, at least for a lot of our working group members sit on the different committees of the EESD. And so, we really thought it would be beneficial to, align our future needs with them and to really make sure that we're not duplicating these efforts in the region. So my next slide. And then finally, how do we implement this vision? So we identified, 10 implementation measures, identify lands for acquisition, survey the needs of each jurisdiction, and these needs could be changing, implement the management strategic plan, build public understanding and support branding or a common message, build a coalition and identify a local champion, integrate into the 2021 regional plan, secure funding, continue to manage the threats to habitat and species, then define the benefits, and then find a smart growth developer. So of course, this is a start, and I'd like to thank those folks who volunteered their time and their ideas. Several of these implementation measures, are being worked on. We've got groups that are busy identifying lands that are high priority. SDMMP is busy implementing the management strategic plan with our land managers. And then, we did have a few groups, TNC, I think the Wildlife Coalition, and then managers from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW who did meet with our executive director, I think in early January, February, to discuss this vision and how habitat conservation will fit into the regional plan and the 5 big moves. And as far as the timeline for the regional plan, it's required to be approved in November of 2021. So, some of these implementation measures that we need to start moving on some of these things. So yeah, this is a start for our vision. And now I'd like to take questions, comments. Leanne?
Okay, I see Isabel K., you had a question mark Is that up from previously, or do you still have a question on this one?
I have two questions. The GHG analysis, why doesn't it include wetlands? That's number one. And number two, how does human population growth fit into the achievability of these goals? I mean, is anybody doing any education on population and reproduction of humans and, you know, all that? You know, we can't stick our head in the sand about what the big impact is. It's human beings.
Isabel, this is Kim. You know, to speak on the GHG analysis, I mean, that's going to be a part of our regional plan. And again, as far as its inclusion, wetlands, I had always thought that wetlands were included. It was as far as like carbon sequestration and that, it was that the other lands, CSS and Chaparral, weren't included. And then as far as the human population growth, I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that. I don't know.
This is Keith Greer. Hello, working group members. Izzy, I can just address your comment really quickly. So population growth is already addressed as part of our sustainable community strategy, which is a companion element to our regional plan. It's part of the regional plan that looks at both transportation and land use. Land use considers population growth and demography. So those two components go together. And as part of the sustainable community strategy, we also have an element to habitat conservation. So that's what we're talking about today. It's the element of the sustainable community strategy dealing with habitat conservation. Population is included, it's just in a different group.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, it looks like Jim Whalen also has a question. He's got his hand up.
Is this thing on?
Yes, we hear you.
What's the last one mean? Find a smart growth developer. See the bottom of the page, implementation.
Yeah, I think that one was thrown in there at the end. I mean, if anyone else wants to add in to, you know, someone that would be looking to maybe, you know, have more urban development, moving things along Transnet. I think that's kind of where we were getting at.
Okay, because I think most people are aware that the preserve that we have today has been in large part assembled by developers who set aside land as mitigation for their projects. So smart growth developers won't have anything to do with the implementation of this program because they don't have any habitat impact. So the screen just went dark. Is that?
I think they're getting ready to switch to the next.
Okay, good. I feel better. So yeah. I see there's a sort of a disconnect between smart growth development doesn't have anything to do with providing the land for the preserve. It's more a consequence of the preserve being assembled and there being less and less land for what used to be called greenfield development. So I'm interested in how that fits with this because it seems contradictory.
Well, Leanne, this is Keith Greer. I can probably address that as well. Hi, Jim. I think we probably shorthanded too much. And so when we said smart growth developer, I think you're talking about finding a developer out there to champion the habitat conservation elements of the overall larger vision. And I think smart growth became a kind of a euphemism for that individual developer who wanted to help us champion this.
Oh.
So if we have some smart developers that want to help us out, that's what we're looking for.
We already thought we were smart developers.
We do too.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Keith. Okay, I don't see any other hands up for questions, but Tessa, are there public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I do have one public comment that I would like to read into the record. Although it may not pertain to this item, I missed it in my inbox for the non-agenda. So I'd like to go ahead and read the first minute of this public comment into the record from Dr. Winston Vickers, UC Davis. Mountain lion research and activity related to connectivity enhancement in San Diego and Southern Riverside counties. With funding from the NCCP Local Assistance Grant Program and the Sandag EMP program, researchers from UC Davis and UCLA Nature Conservancy personnel and faculty and students from the Cal Poly Pomona Civil Engineering Department have just completed a study of 272 miles of highway in San Diego and Southern Riverside counties. Highways examined were I-15, SR 79, 78, 76, and several smaller highways. The goals of the project were to assess sections of highway and 185 specific pre-identified crossing and roadkill sites to determine whether adequate infrastructure existed at those locations that allows for safe crossing to protect both wildlife and drivers. This information can then serve as a roadmap for prioritizing future highway infrastructure placement or improvement. The project with the civil engineers at Cal Poly Pomona also resulted in designs for new crossing structures and modifications for existing structures along I-15 to enhance wildlife connectivity. That is the first minute of this public comment. I do want to mention that the commenter also sent an announcement from CDFW that was referenced in the email. I will be emailing both of these to the full board, and they will also become part of the permit.
Great. Yeah, I think that's something we're all interested in. So thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, the good news is we don't have to vote on that item. Thank you, Kim, for the presentation. Item number 6 is a presentation, an update on the progress of the development of metrics to measure the health of the preserve system. And that's going to be given by Kim Smith and Dr. Chris Preston. So go ahead.
Okay, you guys get to hear from me again. So we're going to give an update on what we've been doing on preserve metrics and also where we're going. And then Chris will step in and give the remainder of the presentation. Dr. Chris Preston from SDMMP. She'll be talking about the specific metrics for each of those categories, and then she'll be also giving specific examples. So next slide, please. So I think you guys have seen this slide many times, but I also just want to reiterate, this is kind of the why, at least Sandag's why. It's part of the development of the metrics, as part of the ITALC audit recommendation. We're required to, develop metrics using the data that we've been collecting over the past, over 10 plus years, and measure the status and trend of our preserve against the baselines established in our regional conservation plans, and then have a scorecard or a report card or something to communicate that to not only the ITALC, but our board, the public. So this is the why. Next slide, please. So what have we done? Where have we been? We came to you in November. We put on a preserve metrics workshop. We gathered all of your input on what you thought were important metrics to measure the health of the preserve system. Then we took all that data in, we synthesized the data, and then we presented at the March 10th EMP working group the discussion about, we presented our metrics categories and had a discussion on how to move forward. So next slide, please. And here are our preserve metrics, and these were the specific categories that we chose to move forward with, and this is how we broke them up. For species, we broke them up into 3 different categories. Landscape species are more of the wide roaming, rare and specialist, and then those species that are affiliated with a certain habitat or community, kind of like cactus wren or gnatcatcher with CSS. And then we broke up habitats into CSS, chaparral, and grassland, riparian oak woodlands, and then the every other habitat type, vernal pools, coastal salt marsh, kind of fell into this sensitive habitats bucket. And then we grouped 7 threats underneath threats, and I'm not going to read each one of them, but there they are above. So this is how we in our discussion at the March working group, we chose to move forward. Next slide. And this is just a quick slide to show how everything kind of fits together. So how the metrics fit in with our the management strategic plan, how the management strategic plan guides the 2-year work plan, which is what guides our funding, which is what, today we voted to approve to call for an ad hoc committee to make recommendations. The metrics, we want to update those. Our vision is to update those every 2 years. So they need to be something that we can, that's replicable every 2 years. And then that would be reported out to, again, our ITALC, our board, our stakeholders. Next slide, please. So where we're headed. So today, again, we're going to be presenting the metrics framework, including what we're going to be measuring for each of those categories: species, habitats, and threats. And then Chris is going to give examples of specific metrics that we've been collecting. And then in September, we're going to come back to you with we're going to present a draft mock-up to the working group. And then we're also going to have our first meeting with the ITALC auditors. And then October through March is really the data analysis, data collection period, a draft report in May, and then we'll be back here next June to give the final report to the EMP working group. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about the specific metrics that we are developing. Chris?
Thank you, Tim. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go through what is the culmination of all of this process that Kim has been talking about, a lot of input from our partners. Next slide, please. So the way we looked at metrics is trying to say how is the preserve system doing? What is the health and the state of the preserve system in San Diego County? So these are the conserved lands in San Diego County. Next slide, please. And in focusing in on this, I will first talk about what the different categories are and some examples of metrics, and then I'll walk you through a few examples for species, for vegetation communities and habitats, and for threats. And I just wanted to credit Emily Perkins, the SDMMP GIS manager. She's helped a lot with this, and we're real excited. We've found a way to zoom in on the preserve system at multiple scales, which we will show at our next meeting, sort of do a storyboard. And today I didn't have the capability of doing that. What I'm going to be presenting today is really very preliminary examples. But first of all, let me just explain for the species what the categories are. Landscape species are those broad species that encompass a lot of the landscape, travel far. Could please turn to the next. So for example, things like golden eagle, American badger, bats, mountain lion, and mule deer, they move across large segments of the preserve system. They may be constrained by urbanization, habitat fragmentation, road infrastructure, and so on. And so they're really the ones that help us. They represent connectivity. And these are all species that we've been collecting information on, data, doing monitoring, and developing management reports and plans. Then the next group is rare and specialist species, and these are ones that are often endemic to smaller areas, so maybe San Diego County or San Diego plus neighboring counties in northern Baja. They may have special habitat requirements. Most of our rare plants fall into this category because they have special soil relationships or climatic conditions that they occur in, or they're very limited distribution. We also include in this category some species that were formerly widespread but have declined to such a point that they're very rare now in occurrence. Next slide. Thank you. So in here we have our Hermes copper and Kino checker spot butterflies. We have southwestern pond turtle, which requires certain characteristics in a riparian system. We have clay endemic plant species, and that includes San Diego thornmint, Otay tar plant, and variegated Deadlia. So they are constrained clay lands. We have vernal pool endemics, which 3 species, including Otay mesa and San Diego mesa mints and San Diego button celery. And then we have other endemics, and we've chosen to highlight Encinitas baccharis, Nuttall's acma spawn, and salt marsh birdsbeak, 3 plant species. Next slide, please. And then moving over to the habitat community species, we have our major habitat categories that we're focusing in on at this stage in our program. Coastal sage grub, which are represented by California gnatcatcher and coastal cactus wren. Riparian and oak woodlands, which indicator species for that are Least-Bell's vireo, southwestern willow flycatcher, and arroyo toad. And then we have the grasslands represented by western burrowing owl, salt marsh by light-footed ridgeways rail, and the unique association between Tecate cypress and Thorn's hairstreak, a butterfly that only occurs in the Tecate cypress groves on Otay Mountain. Now, what you see below this are a number of different ways we can measure how the species are doing. We can simply enumerate how many occurrences we have of those species that we know about in the county and how much is on conserved lands. We can look at population trends from data gathered during our monitoring. We can look at what the threats are to these occurrences, either as generally for the species or for each individual occurrence. We can look at how much monitoring and management we're doing, and then how much we've enhanced or restored habitat for these species. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to just walk you through a real quick example with San Diego thorn mint, which is a rare and specialist species. Next slide, please. And we'll be looking at the first metrics, next slide, our number of occurrences and percent of occurrences on conserved lands. So right now we think that there are 72 extant, which means they still are there or presumed to be there, occurrences in the county, and 49 or 68% of those have been conserved. Next slide, please. Now we can look at population trends. Next slide. And this figure shows rainfall, because that's important in affecting population size, so bio-year rainfall, and the average size of all the San Diego thorn mint occurrences on conserved lands. And what you can see is that they fluctuate a lot, though for the most part they've been relatively small during the years of the drought, and with the biggest peaks during high rainfall years. And this is across all the occurrences. Next slide. But then we can come in and focus in on an individual preserve. And so in the vision that we have with this storyboard through Esri, you can actually fly into a preserve system and check out an occurrence and get information on it. And so we just happened to choose Mission Trails Regional Park, San Diego thorn mint occurrence. Next slide. And here you can see we've mapped the perimeter of this particular occurrence over time. So it's varied somewhat depending on the year in which it was measured. Next slide. And we can also look at the size of the population over time and how that varies in relation to rainfall. Next slide. And then we can see what factors are affecting this population, what threats it is facing, so that we might manage it better. And we can see here that the most important threat to this particular population is non-native grasses. And so then that can drive our management actions. Next slide. So we can control non-native plants over time, which the city is doing. And in a related project, which is not shown here, in Penasquitas Canyon, they've got a Transnet grant to collect seed and plant that seed to increase the population. And so that's something that could be done here as well. Next slide. And then we move on to the habitats indicators, and that's coastal sage grub, chaparral, and grassland, and riparian and oak woodlands, and then the sensitive habitats. And what we can look at is how much each of these habitat types or vegetation communities is available in the county, how much there is, how much has been conserved, and how much urbanization we have relative to this conservation. We can look at how much we've been managing in terms of habitat enhanced and restored. And then what I think is really exciting, we can look at what we call ecological integrity. How healthy are these systems? And we can look at them as they recover from fire. Are they recovering okay? Are they lagging behind, maybe due to the conditions of that they've following the fire, such as precipitation and temperature, or the invasion of non-native grasses. So for coastal sage grub and chaparral communities, the non-native grass cover is really a driver of integrity. The more non-native grass you have, the poor quality that system is in, the lower integrity. And then for riparian and oak woodland, we can really look at dead trees, because that's an indicator that you have things like drought affecting the vegetation community, or we have right now a number of invasive non-native pests such as shot-hole borer and fusarium fungi, which form a complex, as well as the golden spotted oak borer. So as an example, next slide, we're going to look at just the general metrics you could do by the type of vegetation or habitat community. Okay, next slide. And you can see here in gold is what has not been conserved, and in green is the acreages that have been conserved. And you can see that we've done pretty well in conserving chaparral and coastal sage grub. And this gives the overall total acres conserved is, oh, I don't think we have it here. It's over 790,000 or 750,000 if you include what's in public lands in the Forest Service. Next slide. And we can look at how much we've enhanced or restored. Next slide. And through just the EMP programs and Transnet grant programs, so through mitigation for transportation projects and grants to land managers, we've managed over 650 acres in these programs that has been quantified, and about 450 of that has actually been created or restored, and over 200 has been enhanced through invasive plant control. Next slide. And then we can look at ecological integrity, and this is very preliminary data. This is just a mock-up, so please don't take these figures home and think that they're reality, because we're actually still working on this model, but we wanted to just give you an idea of what it would look like. Next slide, please. So if we looked at coastal sage grub, we could define it into integrity classes defined by the percent of shrub cover versus non-native grass cover. And in this mock-up, we have represented about 65% of the vegetation. The coastal sage grub is in medium cover, 25% in high, and 11% in low. Next slide. And this is all coastal sage grub mapped in the county, and just showing its distribution, except for that on military lands. Next slide. And this is a mock-up of what it might look like in terms of ecological integrity classifications on just conserved lands in the county, and color-coded so that green is high ecological integrity, orange is medium, and red is low. Next slide. And you could zoom in and you could see what it looks like for a particular preserve, what the patches of coastal sage grub embedded in chaparral, what the kind of integrity they are based on percent shrub and grass cover. Next slide. And this might be down in the Otay Mesa area. Next slide. And in an area that's recovering from fire. Next slide. We also have these natural processes and threats, and so we have things like fire regime, and we have a number of different ways of describing the health of the preserve system in terms of fire, which is a natural part of the system, but it has been altered by human activities over the last century. We can also look at hydrology, which Robert's going to give a presentation on his index of biological integrity, which I think will be a really interesting metric to keep over time. We can look at invasive species for plants. We can look at the California Invasive Plant Council categories, or we can look for animals at our management strategic plan for invasive animal species. We can look at how many new species have come into the conserved lands, how many we've eradicated, how many we've treated. or how much area we've treated. We can look at human use, how much of our preserve system is publicly accessible and has trails, or how many people are using that. These are metrics we can work with land managers to develop. For climate change, we can look at vulnerability of species that are impacted by drought, which we have a lot of information on that from our monitoring, or vulnerable to sea level rise, which is a problem in some of our marsh and coastal areas. And we can look at climate trends in terms of abiotic factors, measuring temperature and rainfall. And we can look at urbanization, how much of the habitat is in patches greater than 5,000 hectares, which is thought to be the threshold to have high small vertebrate diversity. We can look at the wildland-urban interface where there tends to be edge impacts. And finally, we do a lot with loss of connectivities. That public comment by Winston Vickers, that is an amazing project that we will be showcasing that has gone through and really looked at how we can improve connectivity for the mountain lion, which in turn improves connectivity for other species. And we can look at how much we achieve through our wildlife crossing improvements. And here I'm just going to give you a few examples. Next slide, please, of fire history. So we can look at how many acres or hectares, depending on how we want to display it, have been burned. And in here you can see that we had in the 80s and 90s, a moderate level of fire activity, around 200,000 acres, but then it really jumped up in the 2003 and 2007 wildfires from 2000 to 2010. And then lately it's been rather quiet, though we have had some significant fires on the coast, which we used to not get so much back in 2014 and so on. Next slide. And here you can look at burn frequency. So 32% of the undeveloped land in the county is burned in the last 20 years, and 62% has not burned. And about 5,200 acres has burned more than 3 times in the last 20 years, and those might be areas that are in need of help. Next slide. And you can just look at a fire map looking at burns over time. Next slide. Okay, I'm done. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Kim and Chris. Let's start with if there are any questions.
I just wanted to make a quick announcement that all of these presentations will be made available on our website after the meeting. So
thanks, Kim. So are there any questions or comments from working group members first? Put your little hands up. Or anyone else in the audience? I see Trish Smith. Let's see.
Hi, this is Trish. I just want to say great work to Chris Preston and her team. Really exciting work, and I look forward to learning more about it as it's developed. So thank you so much for taking the lead on this, Chris, and for your leadership, Kim.
Well,
great
to say it's been a team effort, because we got very good feedback from both the EMP working group meetings as well as smaller group meetings, and with biologists, and then even with just a smaller core. So we've gotten a lot of help on coming up with these ideas, and I think over time we'll continue to get that feedback and improve it.
Okay, anyone? I don't see any other hands up. If you want to put them up real quick, we can take your question. Otherwise, Tessa, are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I do not have public comments on item 6.
Okay, and I don't see any further questions. Thank you both, Kim and Chris. Really interesting presentation. We lots of good information there. Okay, on to item number 7, our final presentation of the meeting. Dr. Robert Fisher from USGS will discuss the Macrofauna Index of Biotic Integrity, identifying management options across watersheds. Take it away.
This is a super weird format. Anyway, it looks like there's 50 people here, so that's more people than normally come to our meetings. So that's exciting that people are tuning in. I thought that Chris and Kim did a great job. I have surprisingly much more time than I thought I was going to have, but I won't take it all. So we should be getting done early. What I want to say is that this is a draft. The maps you'll see are draft maps, so they're not, I wanted to present it, but we're still doing QA/QC on the baseline data behind it, and we got slowed down because of COVID. So look at the presentation, but it's not for implementation yet when you see some of the recommendations. But it gives you the conceptual idea of what we're proposing to do. And so what we've been looking at for about the last 7 months, 8 months, since about last October, is trying to integrate all of the stream survey data that we've been generating at USGS with other partners and funded by other partners since about 2000 or so. And what we've got a standardized sampling protocol we use where we address these stream reaches into 250 meter reaches, and then we survey the entire the macro fauna of the riparian system when we do that. And so I'm going to kind of talk through the conceptual way I'm visualizing we'll use those outputs, and then make some conclusions about next steps, and show how this can integrate with what I think are some solid metrics to inform management. And then this first cover slide was just to show that a lot of the same people have been collecting this data over the 20-year period of time. So we've got consistency across observers, as well as consistency of protocol. Basically, once we establish a protocol, we've been pretty consistent in that. And so it's been a lot of work by a lot of the same people. Next slide. And the program we've been part of at USGS is called the ARMI program, the Amphibian Reptile Monitoring Initiative. And I didn't give the URL for it, but we've got a really good website. And if you just Google USGS and ARMI, then you can find it. You can find it's a national program. We've been part of that national program since it started in 2000. And it's got this basic conceptual model where we have different ranges of inference across this pyramid, basically. And so apex monitoring would be like the work that we heard from Winston earlier, where we're actually putting radio collars on individual lions, let's say, and then looking at those individuals moving through the landscape. And then mid-level monitoring might be where we actually have, we're making inference over a specific area, and we're not studying specific individuals per se, but we might have cameras under underpasses across Southern California and get a sense of how often are lions using different underpasses. And base assessment might be, in this lion example, where we're just looking at any records for lions from any database, that from My Naturalist or whatever, where we're saying there's a record for a lion in this place. And so all of our research has been kind of in this pyramid format. And so a lot of our work on rare amphibians has been on red-legged frogs or mountain yellow-legged frogs, where we're studying individuals and the disease dynamics of those individuals over time in small populations. In San Diego County, we've been doing a mid-level monitoring at Camp Pendleton with our arroyo toad monitoring with the base for almost 20 years now. And this year, for the first time, we're trying to implement what we call kind of a mid-level monitoring approach for San Diego County for arroyo toads. And then base assessments would be any studies we've done where we've applied this 250-meter reach. And so in this talk, what I'm trying to do is take the data from across all of our kinds of riparian research and then combine it to develop a specific type of metric. And I'll show what that is and then hopefully get some feedback. So next slide. And so again, it was driven by amphibians. And so these are the taxa within this framework for Southern California. So there's species that are actually listed as endangered or threatened, like the arroyo toad, the yellow-legged frog, or the threatened red-legged frog. There's things that are sensitive, like the newt that's in San Diego County, or what we're calling a pre-listing species, which is the western spadefoot. And that's one species we're trying to help use kind of this approach a little bit to inform the service about status. And then there's other non-listed amphibians that we monitor as well, the western toad, the California tree frog, and the Pacific tree frog. And at any given stream reach, we are doing detectability assessments and looking for occupancy of any of these taxa. Next slide. Additionally, we're looking for native aquatic reptiles and fish, like the two-striped garter, the red-sided garter, or the western pond turtle are really important key species down here. The pond turtle, because it's a pre-listing species as well. And then we look for native fishes that will tell us something about the integrity of that system. And in particular, steelhead or lamprey in the bottom may be more informative about connectivity within watersheds if they are showing anadromous forms in these systems. So all of these data are recorded at each 250-meter reach. And then next slide. And then we also record data on invasive aquatic species. And so that would be the suite of turtles that are out here, the crayfish, the cloud frogs, the bullfrogs, the different warm water fishes. And then these would be then threats as that might occur within that reach that overlaps the native amphibian, reptile, and fish diversity. And so over, like I said, the 20 years, we've now been building up this database, and it's we're calling it the Southern California Multi-Taxa Database, and we're trying to harvest the data out of our database to integrate across these different types of taxa, the native taxa and the invasive taxa. Next slide. And so in doing that, and like I said, we're still doing QA/QC. We've been slowed down a bit because of world events, and so we haven't finished that. That's why the maps are not as accurate as it will be when we finish our QA/QC. But for this slide, just showing you these categories. So we've got frogs, salamanders, turtles, snakes, fish, and invertebrates, and then what's called megafauna, just invasive beavers. And you can see on the right side, total number of native records, and then total number of invasive records. And so some of these are, we have repeated visits to the same sites over time. Some of these are unique sites. And what we're trying to do is just combine all of those observations into one usable database for then doing these analyses. And this doesn't include all of our observations. There's additional observations or counts from the Santa Monica's from LA that aren't counted here, but the data I'll show today is somewhere around almost 340,000 observations of individuals across Southern California for this these macrofauna. And I'm calling it macrofauna versus like what a lot of the EPA guidance does, where they're looking at macroinvertebrates. Even though we have some macroinvertebrates like crayfish and Asiatic clams, we're not looking at dragonflies and smaller things. So I'm calling it macrofauna. Okay, next slide. And so what we've done is we've looked at different spatial frameworks for analyzing this data or for compiling the data. And so what we've done is we're using what's called a HUC-12, Hydrologic Unit Code 12. And these are then mapped units within watersheds that are somewhat equivalently sized, and they're standardly mapped. And these are the HUC-12s for southwestern San Diego County. Pointing, so you guys can see me point, right? I don't know if you can see the mouse, but in any case, you can see we blew up this one section where there's Otay Lake, and you can see Proctor Valley and some of the watersheds, the small tributaries south of Otay Lake, like Little Cedar, are part of that HUC-12 unit. And then downstream from Otay Lake is a separate HUC-12 unit. And so these are kind of geospatial units that I think are at the right scale for doing management, where we might be able to manage the watershed at the scale of the HUC-12. And so that's why we wanted to integrate data across that size so that we could think about what are our management opportunities. Okay, and so the next slide. And so this is the data, the spatial data set. So these are all of the points that we've got data that we're integrating into this index. And so far, I want to just show proof of concept with data that I have some confidence in. Like I said, I still have to do QA/QC on it, but I've got confidence that my staff and I have generated the data. And then we were working with Western Riverside County and their MSHCP. When Yvonne Moore was there, we did training with them, and their staff are using the similar 250-meter reach. And so we're combining data with Western Riverside County, and then also with the National Park Service of Santa Monica Mountains. We've been doing about 20 years of monitoring, and we call that's another mid-level site that's comparable to our Camp Hamilton site for royal toads. And so we've been doing that site for like 20 years. And so we've now combined our 7,000 with their another 1,000 from Western Riverside County. And so we've got about 8,000 sites, which are 250-meter reaches. And again, some of these reaches we visited for almost 20 years. Other reaches we visited just once. And so I'm not showing you density across Huck, which we will do at some point, but I'm just showing you how we're then, how these are laid out, and then we're combining them at that Huck 12 level. Next slide. And so because we're using this spatial framework, we can then get covariates at the Huck 12 level to compare against our both native species diversity and sensitive species diversity, as well as invasive species diversity. And so on the top right, this is an example of a historical natural driver, and this is just showing precipitation, but there are these historical natural drivers that drive where species were through time, like historically, right? So they're the biogeographic features, and those include rainfall, temperature, and geology. Let's say those might be examples, and that's going to determine where habitat might have been suitable for arroyo toads or red-legged frogs or some other species over the past. Then we can look at climate modified drivers on the landscape, such as wildfire, drought, and increasing temperatures. And then those are drivers that will impact where species can occur now. And so on the lower left, that's just showing percent area burned over time. And we saw a different figure from Chris a few minutes ago about most recent burn. But what this is showing is that those darker colors are areas that taking the square kilometers within that Huck, what percentage of that has burned over the last 110 years or so. And some of those Hucks have burned almost 600% over that period of time, meaning not the entire Huck burned potentially, but that there's an equivalent of fire within that Huck of about almost 600%, between 200 to 600% over time. And so those are areas that have a much higher burn intensity, let's say, over this period of record, and then others have burned much less. And so these are things that could drive where things are now. Again, we can use these increasing temperatures over the last 50 years as another driver, and drought, of course, is another driver. So there's other ways we can do it. And then but by using this similar spatial context, it gives us a good way to, I just messed up my screen. Gives us a good way to think about this. Okay, so as covariates, the next slide. And so then what we've done is we've taken 3 anthropogenic hydrologic impairments. These are kind of anthropogenic factors across the landscape that might impair these watersheds, these Hucks. And so on the top left, on the top right, sorry, we have, this is just the total count of groundwater wells per Huck 12. And so you can see that LA Basin has a lot more, higher density of Hucks that have a lot more water wells, groundwater wells. And this might affect the amount of water that's on the surface during summer or spring. The one below it is the number of dams per Huck. And then this now isn't normalized by the size of the dam within the Huck, but it's just a total count of dams per Huck. And so we still want to normalize it by the size of the individual dams. And then what we were trying to do is figure out a way to get a downstream impact of upstream dams, like a cumulative dam impact within a watershed, and then such that the lower hucks are related to the upper hucks, since we're still sorting that out. And then the one on the lower left is a really interesting one. This is now the kilometer, like linear kilometers of artificial channels per square kilometer of huck. And so these are the artificial channels and channelization within that. And so you see LA Basin pops right out because a lot of agricultural channels were built early on, and I think that's what's informing that. But then we've done is taken these three factors and then combined them into a hydrologic impairment score, and that's in the top left. And so we can play around with weighting. We haven't normalized any of this data. This is just to visually show you how we're thinking about it, and then we'll do some multivariate statistics on it at some point, to hopefully soon, to be able to better describe what are the most important drivers. But this is the combination then of those three drivers on the landscape. Next slide. And so now what I'm showing is some of the synthesis data. So on the left side are the invasive species counts, and the right side are the native species. And so on the left side, I've got on the top slide the number of invasive species, just the count of invasive species per Huck 12. And then what we've done is we've taken a multiplier and multiplied some invasive species with this multiplier, like a -5 or a -10, like bullfrogs or crayfish, because those are maybe significantly worse than like maybe Gambusia, a mosquito fish or something. So we've played around with some weighting. So then the bottom slide shows weighting there. And then on the top right, we have the number of native species, just the count of native species per huck. And then on the bottom right, we've taken some of those native species, and if they're endangered, we've given them a multiplier, or if they're pre-listed species, we've given them a multiplier, to then create try to discriminate which watersheds might be more important for conservation investments if we're worried about rare taxa versus just total taxa, total diversity, or total richness. So those are those. And now what we can do is we can then start mixing these and combining to look at the interactions between native species, invasive species, and hydrologic impairment. So the next slide. And so this is an example of that. So now on the y-axis, we have that's the total score for native species per Huck 12. So that Huck, and this is using the multiplier. So if a Huck has red-legged frogs and two-striped garter snakes and maybe an endangered fish, it might score much higher than another one that might have similar richness, number of species, but not as many endangered species. And then on the bottom, I'm just using the straight count of number of invasive species. And so in this, what we can see is that we're kind of starting to partition that variance and saying, what do we think would be a way we would approach some of these different hydrologic units, these watersheds in management as a way to think about it. And so in the top left in green, those are hucks, those are watershed units that have good species diversity, native species diversity, and low invasiveness, they're low invasive diversity. And so those are sites that we want to add biosecurity, let's say, and really the focus of management there is keeping out novel invasives, doing education with people so they don't bring pet turtles there, doing a variety of tasks that would be tying to keeping those intact watersheds intact and keeping out invasives. The top right are watersheds that still have good numbers of native species. They've got a good number of natives, a good score for natives, but they're impaired by invasives. So those watersheds, those Huck units, are places where we might do conservation investments in removing invasive species. And then the bottom left are ones that have maybe a low number of natives and low number of invasives. And those might be places that, because they have low impairment, they might be conservation opportunities, places where we could think about as maybe climate refugia, or places that at least in our database, we don't have data for natives historically there, but maybe they were historically there, and so we can do reintroductions into some of those sites. So those might be conservation opportunities. And then the bottom right are sites that have high number of invasives and not a lot of natives. And so for the native score, and those might be sites we abandon for right now, or we really look at their hydrologic function. And those might be things like Tecolote Canyon, where we might say, really, we need to dry up Tecolote Canyon and change the way hydrology works there. And then that's going to then give us a knockdown effect of knocking out invasives. And then we can think about recovery of natives in Tecolote Canyon. And so those are sites that we might not do anything at until we deal with the function of those sites. And then it doesn't make sense to invest in invasives management because until we change the system, let's say, if those are impaired because of system issues. So next slide. So I gave this talk in December at SCMMP, and that's kind of where I ended. And then people like Michael Eck and others said, show us where these sites are. So then here's some maps of some of these watersheds, so you get a sense of what it looks like across the landscape. And again, this is not entirely, I'm not done with all the QA/QC, but you get it. I can just show you kind of as a sense of how things look. And so now this is just looking at that last graph of native score versus invasive species. And you can see there's a series of these red sites that are more coastal, where we have a seasonal flow and we have a lot of other threats in those systems. And then what you see is that we have a lot of these orange sites in the further east. And now those are things I was saying might be conservation opportunities because they don't have a lot of natives and they also don't have a lot of invasives. So you don't need to do a lot of management there. But through climate change, they might be now more suitable for native species, whereas previously they might have been too cold or they might have had too much snow. And so now the changing conditions of our landscape might make those more suitable for reintroductions of native species into some of those watersheds, let's say. And then the green ones are ones we really would want to just focus on doing good biosecurity and making sure we keep out novel invasives, and especially if they're open to the public, like say where people seem to just drop invasive turtles anywhere they can. We want to do more outreach and education at those sites. So that's one way to kind of visualize it. And then the yellow sites would be places where we would do these investments in invasives control. So those might make the most sense at the upper end of the watershed to focus on removing bullfrogs or crayfish. So that's one way to look at this data. So the next slide. Now this is looking at it with the two negatives, let's say. So this is looking at invasive species versus hydrologic impairment. And so in this one, you can see these green ones pop out, and those are places that have low invasives and low impairment. So I'm not showing you whether or not they have high natives on this slide, but I'm showing you those are places that we want to have, maybe think about our first conservation investments, because they could have good natives or they could be good opportunities for natives. And so those green ones have low impairment in these two ways. And I like these as metrics, to think about these metrics, because then we can look at the changes over time. So if we go back to the last slide for just one sec, and we see these yellow areas where there's high invasives. So our metric might be that over the next 5 years or 10 years, we're going to try to take a place that is yellow and move it to a different color. Like we want to move it to green, because we want to remove invasives and get more green on this slide and less yellow. And then some of these orange ones we might want to get more green and less orange. And so those might be ways we could set goals for management by watershed unit. And in some instances, in some of these green areas, that's maybe we do conservation investments for land acquisition, where we might want to finish acquiring some areas within a specific defined hydrologic unit, where there might be opportunities where there were invasives, there were ponds on private lands, and maybe if we could acquire those private lands, those ponds that had invasives could be then managed in a different way. And so those might be places to look for conservation opportunities through acquisitions, let's say. So then back to the next slide. And so then to the next slide. And now this is now where we're looking at the interaction between native species, high native score, and low impairment. And so that green right on the coast, that's Camp Pendleton, where we have a lot of intact watersheds. And so we've got high native diversity and low impairment. And then you can see, you know, a handful of sites through the eastern San Diego County, and then up into the bigger mountains. But you see Western Riverside County is a big red spot. That's a lot of impairment and not a lot of natives in that area. And then same with some of the North County smaller watersheds in San Diego County, where there's not a lot of natives and there's high amount of impairment based on these 3 impairment factors feeding into this one hydrologic impairment score. The next slide. And so then this is just showing those 3 maps together. And like I said, we can decide what might be important metrics from these and how we want to see them change over time in setting goals for conservation investments, and then tracking whether these colors are changing over time. And then we really need to do the statistics to say what is the threshold for impairment or invasives that we're setting, and then how do we meet those thresholds? So, but this helps us at least think about where to apply management. Next slide. Next slide. Oh yeah, there you go. Sorry, stay on this one. So this is now one of the things we're doing is, like, so we're working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, trying to help inform them as part of this team, with Fish and Wildlife Service, with the state and others, on pond turtles and trying to do a more honest assessment as part of their listing package. And so what I've done here is I've just mapped out where we've detected pond turtles and the difference, and we've got a lot of gray cells where in some cases, a lot of cases, those are true absences where we've done actually surveys for pond turtles. In some cases, they might not be true absences. But the difference between light green and dark green is really important because the pond turtles can persist in the landscape for a long time, maybe up to 40 years, let's say, or longer as adults. But without juvenile recruitment, those are just living dead, basically. And so what we've done here is highlighted where we're seeing recruitment, evidence of recruitment, versus evidence of just pond turtles. And then we can look at these hydrologic impairment values or invasives across these occupied hucks to try to help do a better qualitative, let's say, assessment of the status of turtles in Southern California, and as part of their ongoing, kind of listing assessment approach. So that's kind of how I wanted to lay out how we're thinking about this metric and why we're calling it what we're calling it. And then I'll show the next slide, which is just the conclusion. So my question is, can we use this framework to think about various conservation and management investments? And I think so. I think it can really help inform the management strategic plan, in setting goals, especially for our conservation grants program. Can we combine it with the California Stream Condition Index, which is the swamp bioassessments? And so we're going to be doing that and playing around with that. And then can we use this framework to challenge the watershed units with climate drivers to assess the resiliency? Where are we getting less water than we used to? And how is that going to impact future viability of some of these basins? And same with temperature, and same with these increased fire events. And then can we use this framework to look for climate refuge opportunities? So sites that were historically just too cold, they couldn't persist possibly because of environmental conditions, but those now they're experiencing different environmental conditions, like especially through the drought, where it wasn't actually as cold and we weren't getting as much snow. There might be available for species that they weren't available for before to think about that's climate refugia. And then can we use these metrics to track success and failures through specific watershed units over time to establish specific conditions and goals over time for showing that management is being effective at recovering some of these taxa, or in the cases of non-invaded watersheds that our outreach is doing a good job of keeping those sites biosecure and not allowing new invasives in as maybe a goal. So anyway, that's the presentation I had and how I'm thinking about it. And I've talked with a lot of people about it and kind of continue to kind of present it and refine it. And like I said, hopefully we'll finish the QA/QC in the next couple of months, and then we'll be able to have more confidence in the maps. The maps are 95% right, but we just want to get all of it better still. So anyway, thanks for the opportunity to talk today, and thanks for the extra time.
Thank you, Robert. That was really informative. Hopefully over time we can see some of those yellows and oranges go to green. I hate the idea of using it to give up on areas, but I can see the logic behind that. So are there any questions? Yeah. Are there any questions or comments from group members? Please raise your hand. I see Jim Whalen has his hand up, so let's start with him. Anyone else, go ahead and raise your hand so I can see them in the queue.
Jim's self-muted, I think.
Oh, Jim?
By the organizer. Okay, hi.
Who's unmuted?
Okay, I like the direction of this because our understanding of this entire program from 25 years ago was first we assemble the preserve. The preserve has been identified. What we're going to do is pull that together. And then after that, we're going to make it better by managing, restoring, improving, enhancing. And I like the trend of this as opposed to we need to buy more land. Because if we don't hit a point where we have enough land for the preserve to be functional, we will never get to the place where Robert just took us. And that's pretty much why I think Matt had something he wanted to offer too, but that's what I had.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see Matt's hand up. Did you want to offer something, Matt, or anyone else? Questions or comments? I don't see any hands up. Tessa, are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I do not have public comments on this item.
Okay, I now see Matt's hand up, so let's unmute Matt. Go ahead.
Well, I primarily wanted to agree with what Jim Whalen said. I mean, our long-term opportunities here are just to make this preserve as functional, as efficient as possible. And we can do that best by focusing on what was agreed to at the beginning, which was a set acreage of land and then a full commitment to maintenance and management to make it a success. So I like where this was ending up and going as well. I think it's important. I would hope that people realize just what a success has been created here in San Diego County, which should be a source of pride for everyone on this call, because no one expected this thing to succeed, and it certainly has. And we should just be protecting what we've created and make sure that it reaches its full potential.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, if there are no further comments or questions, and I don't see anyone's hands up, so I just want to thank you again, Robert, for that presentation, and remind everybody that they will be sending these all out so that we can dive in a little deeper on some of those maps. So we'll wrap up the meeting today. The next EMP working group is scheduled for Tuesday, September 8th from 1 to 3 p.m. And do we know at this point if it'll be virtual again? I'm assuming probably.
Yeah, I'm assuming virtual, maybe a different virtual platform. We're playing around. We'll potentially have maybe something different, but likely virtual.
Yeah, so likely virtual. You know what? I'm really pleased at the turnout today. we really did actually have more folks be able to join us, and nobody had to go into the parking structure or any of that. So that's great. So we'll see everybody again on September 8th from 1 to 3 on Tuesday.
I'm sorry, Vice Chair Carmichael, I just thought I would add to Kim's remarks that we are exploring some different platforms, but we are also exploring potentially doing hybrid meetings that are both in person and virtual. So that's coming down. It just depends on the county's health orders and updates to how we're reopening everywhere in the county. But that option may be one that comes up in September as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so this meeting is adjourned at 2:43 p.m. and I hope everybody stays well and has a good rest of the week. Thanks everybody for joining. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks, man.
Bye, guys.